Shanti. Welcome back, friends. Now I'd like to read this verse from chapter 2, verse number 40 from the Bhagawad Gita. Every Thursday we do our Gita Satsang. This chapter is called The Nature of Right Action. The verse is, Krishna says, in this path of yoga action, there is no danger of unfinished business, nor are there latent within it the opposite cancelling effects of duality. Even a little practice of this religion will free one from dire fears and colossal sufferings, which are inherent in the unceasing cycles of death and rebirth. The unceasing cycles of death and rebirth. And you wonder, how did we get into this, or how did this cycle get into motion in the first place? Like again, disciples of Buddha asked him, how did this start? And he described a little bit, perhaps. But more importantly, and well known is his reply to his students. He said, much better to spend your time understanding how you can get out of this wheel of suffering of life and death than to ask, perhaps you might say, too many questions. You know, he may be, as different masters do at different times, they are trying to make a certain point. And so he was telling his disciples that, yes, this is true, just like Christ would say, but is not unfortunately accepted in modern teachings very widely, that he spoke of reincarnation. For example, his verse of encouragement to devotees who finally, as he says, overcome. And then he says, I shall make them a pillar in my Father's mansion, and they shall go out no more. Well, go out where? Go out again into creation. So he who overcometh the tests, the challenges, who puts on a good fight, Christ was saying, he will attain the state of yoga. He shall come out of this. Death shall not touch him, and things like that. He shall go out no more in this cycle, unless so that God chooses, that somebody go and help. Similarly, Yogananda ji said, and imagine, friends, in modern times with all the information at our fingertips, literally, it's like the knowledge has come, but the wisdom got lagging behind somewhere. And it's almost like we have to bring this brother, sister knowledge, which is important, but wisdom, without which knowledge is of very little use. That the words of Rubaiyat, in the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. And Yogananda said, very few people again know that he was a great saint who had God's request and in his timely wisdom cloaked the teachings, the true teachings of, you might say, Sufism and prevalent in his times in such a way that very few understood that it was, first of all, a love poem between the soul and God, the little spirit and the absolute spirit, between a human being and God. That it was often, till recently, and still is widely considered to be a wonderful love poem. Well, it was not just a love poem. The religion or spirituality is not a sentiment. It is of extreme importance for your and my understanding, on which depends our happiness, on which depends vital questions like, why do people live in a certain way? Why don't they reform themselves? Why does death and suffering come in a certain way? Let me read before death. I want to talk a little bit about suffering. That if you were not present a couple weeks ago, Dr. Amar, one of our acharyas, he shared a remarkable dream that his wife, Dr. Mansi, both of them are here in Pune, and they had a wonderful dream. She had a wonderful dream, which she would then share with him, and he shared in a satsang. They both are handling a COVID ward in Navale Medical College for the last 1 year, slightly over a year now. They are both physicians, and that's what physicians are right now doing mostly. And right now, last week when they were working night and day in the ward, seeing so much suffering, death, this time unfortunately across all ages. And I remember Ansi was saying that there are everybody from an infant to a senior citizen, and think of the complexity of managing those cases, the sheer number that is coming, and for it's not easy for doctors. And so what happened was, they were both thinking about it. Why is there so much suffering? What's going on? Has God forgotten us, his children? And just questions like that. It's like, you call out more deeply at that time. And next morning, shortly before she woke up, she actually woke up, and while Amar was making tea for her, she went back to sleep. And in that moment, she had this dream. And in this dream, the place, the hospital where she was seeing and witnessing all this year so much suffering, she was asking God, why so much, so much? And she saw the presence of Yogananda ji in a white, shimmering robe. She knew him by his presence. She didn't see his face, but she saw his feet, and she said they were very young feet. And she touched those feet, and Master, so in order to not draw attention to himself, he allowed her to touch the feet. But when she expressed a greater interest to get to know him and, get little, you might say, personal in her interaction, he just quickly moved through the crowds of the hospital, and she couldn't see what happened. Except in a moment in her dream, she found herself in a very beautiful garden. Very few people over there, and everybody just having a very nice time. The sun was out, the flowers were everywhere, children were having a very good time. And she herself found that she was actually making little mud toys. She was playing and, using clay to make different toys. And after she had made a few toys, the thought came, hey, why not make a few human forms? And so she makes a few human forms, and they turned out quite well. And this thought, she said, this desire went into her that, oh, how nice it would be if these forms came to life. It's very much like Parvati's story of how she created one of her children. And ask and you shall receive. In the dream, instantly her wish was granted. And these little babies, you might say made of mud, became babies of flesh. And she was quite surprised at this. And she said, are you also seeing what I am seeing, Amar? And Amar said, looks like flesh, but I don't believe it. She said, why don't you touch it? And he touched it, and he said, oh my goodness, this is flesh. This is a soft baby. Interestingly, when they were both touching the child and keeping their hands close to the body, the mud ball, the mud baby, became a human baby. When they withdrew their hands a little bit, it quickly turned to mud. They would take the hands closer, it would become alive. Hands withdrawn, back to mud. Hands closer, came back to life, withdrawing the hands. All you see was mud, expressionless, no movement. And then in her dream, which then soon ended after this, she felt Divine Mother telling her, I am giving you life. I am sustaining you all. I am working through you all, doctors and others. I understand what's happening, how serious of a problem this is. But remember, you are simply mud. There are so many planets in your and my knowledge right now which are mud balls. Our planet is not a mud ball. It is a mud ball and much more. It's teeming with visible life. Life is everywhere, Yogananda ji said, interestingly, including the physical sun and all. But in a tangible, physical way, the way you and I relate to life, the earth is very precious. That when Divine Mother was saying, I've infused life over there, and I know of the suffering that is coming, but it's because of the distance that people have themselves created. And what happens? Just like in the very beginning, Amar and Mansi were praying that you feel a distance from God. Now, has God withdrawn his presence? I don't know. I think it's very unlikely, except in the case of a good expert gardener, that he knows that if I water my plants slightly less today, the roots will reach out more and thereby making the plant strong. So maybe temporarily in a playful mood, God may hide himself, like a parent will hide himself here and there and something like that. But let's say it's safe to assume by and large that he who created everything, the tenderness of the human heart, cannot be so tender to keep himself or herself, whichever way you look, God, from his children for too long. He is in us, he has become us. So then what happens at death? What is death? The cessation of life? Well, let me read you directly the lines of our great master, Paramhans Yogananda ji, who through his yoga practice, by the way, experienced death in a conscious way. He would stop his heartbeat, stop his breath rate on stage, invite doctors and say, and they say, there's no pulse, there's no breath. What's happened? And he's still, Yogananda ji is still talking on the stage. Imagine what all he had to do to wake up people in modern times to the concept that breath is an expression of life. Heart rate is an expression, one of the expressions. It is not the sole defining characteristic of life. So let me read his lines. Death is not annihilation, he writes. Death is a state of passive, involuntary relaxation brought on by accident, disease, or sorrow. The forcible and permanent disconnection of life current from the body is popularly called death or complete annihilation of life. In reality, it is only a temporary state. It is not the end of things, but merely the transfer from the domain of changeable, ugly matter to the realm of infinite joy and multicolored lights. Why not learn the method by which you can switch off the life current from the entire body through conscious will by the steady practice of meditation and thus free the soul from the bondage of death? Just as electricity does not die when a light bulb breaks, so our real self is not destroyed at death, but retires into the infinite, omnipresent self. We experience this earth through the five senses of taste, touch, smell, hearing, and sight. Heaven is experienced through intuition. That is why it is necessary to meditate often and deeply, because in meditation you develop the sixth sense or intuition. We are not flesh, we are spirit, with a capital S, he writes over here. There is a heaven awaiting you, and the only way to get there is by developing your intuition through intense prayer and meditation. Just like Dr. Amar had that prayer, Lord, what's happening? And you get an answer. Divine Mother, what is going on? Help me, guide me. So far, I only know myself as flesh. I remember many years ago when I was seeing death, and I was quite sad seeing this sudden people come with all the hope, all the money, all the naturally the inclination to do everything in their capacity to see a dear one well, back in normal health, certainly not passing away in an unnatural way. And then, unfortunately, again and again, through eternity, through those timeless cycles, it happens. Death, as if comes and steals over, and we are left with lack of understanding. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, "Oh Arjuna, the wise mourn neither for," mourn means to feel sorrow, "for neither for those who are on the planet, who are living right now, nor those who leave." Well, you may say, are they heartless? Not at all. They are living in such a greater joy that it's a little flickering, passing moment. Yes, we can live that moment to the highest by engaging ourselves in a nice way. But then human beings also mistakenly think that life itself is out there in the heart, in the breath, in the body. In these last few days, in the beginning, as I was saying, I saw and have interacted with some friends, relatives, guru bhais who have lost a dear one, a near one. I'm not saying, friends, that through some intellectual understanding, perhaps because of this discourse or book reading, that give up your sorrow. Giving up the sorrow comes when we experience joy. True joy comes when we really understand what is happening. Where is my dear one? Where is my near brother and sister? What happened? Why did they have to suffer? So we have to understand, first of all, that let that moment pass by. But I saw that some souls over here who had the understanding, even intellectual, and some born of their meditation, that no, I'm not just this body. I have been past this body. Yogananda ji said that this body is not what it is. There are greater experiences of things that we have experienced. Hence, we can say that my father or mother or whoever it was, passed away because of into some higher realm. The body has gone, it has to go. It is unfortunate if it goes in a little state of helplessness, which is what we are seeing. But we shouldn't feel helpless. You and I shouldn't feel helpless. We should be full of hope with this teaching, with what Yogananda ji said, with your and my experience. And if you're not having that experience, ask why. It might be because we are attached. As long as we are attached to something, well, that's what you get because you asked for it. But if your prayer is to know the Lord, yes, in his own good time, he comes. However, a little glimpse or experience is never too far from a devotee. When a devotee says, Lord, let's say I like this harmonium. Oh, I love this harmonium and I can't live without this harmonium. Well, if this harmonium dies or if it is burnt or broken or destroyed by somebody's playing, I can be hurt. Well, take care of the harmonium, but why be attached? Be attached to the joy of your own self. The only truth that is that you are spirit, that there is a God, that he set everything into motion so it looks like it is coming and going. And yes, on that level, if we are at that level, then yes, things are coming and things are going. Birth is happening, death is happening. We have to accept it. I'm not saying deny it, but let's develop the understanding that how can we go beyond it. Kriyananda ji said in a deep state of consciousness, one time Paramahansa Yogananda ji said to him, what a line this is. He said, in reality, nothing is really even happening. He said, in God, everything is happening in the present moment. There is no past, there is no future. Let me again repeat that first line. In reality, nothing is even happening because God has dreamt us. Now you may say, why? Well, so that we can wake up to the joy of the reality that nothing is really happening. And now, yes, very few people know this, but if you know this, make that your prime request to God. Pray. Give me that experience and remembrance so I can pray for other souls. I can hold the hand of others. I can grieve them. May my words have such conviction that people get a little glimpse or a feeling or a momentary understanding that it might be possible, and then it's like a sprout, then in its own time. This is quite a big cycle, no? We all discover and develop this understanding that, oh, each one, look at the dignity and respect God has given each soul, that only when you want, in your unique way of learning and growing and evolution, will you discover that you were nothing but an individualized creation of me. I became you, and you sort yourself in so many ways. And coming back to all those attachments of people, places, things, and clothes, and whatnot. Again, things in themselves are okay, but attachment to them is preventing our experience of God. They say to the closest disciples, Yogananda ji would speak of chiefly two things: attunement and non-attachment. Actually, one cannot even get attunement with attachment because you're attached to something else and your master may be here, but our mind is somewhere else. So to understand, or we may be attached to our way of doing things. But attunement means in body, mind, spirit, feelings. What does Guru want? But then Guru is nothing but a very completely willing vehicle of God. So what does God want in this moment? So friends, again, what shall we do about this now in this situation? Well, first of all, let's share this wisdom with others. To some degree, let them know. Perhaps you can write, talk about it, put some quotes out there, offer yourself to help people understand if they might be willing to some possibilities that might exist after death. You may start a little prayer group. You could also and must deeply meditate now. Pray, and those things are very important. Now, you may say, how can my silent, quiet, still meditation help the world? I wake up and the world is still the same. If anything, it is worse. Well, St. Francis of Assisi had this exact thought many years, decades, centuries ago, now over about a millennia ago, when, somebody told him, your prayers are not helping anyone. Look, the world suffering is increasing. And so he prayed to Christ with this doubt that, is it really true? How can I improve myself then? Christ came to him and said, you're doing just by doing what you're doing right now, Francis. And he said, remember, when you and your brothers are with me in heaven, I will show you all the countless souls who were saved through your prayers. Now, what really happens is this, that we touch a level of consciousness, let's say deep stillness. Well, everything is a product of consciousness. Thoughts themselves come from consciousness, and they come at different levels of consciousness. So if you want to worry, if your consciousness is low, well, unfortunately, that's what you will entertain. So if and then consciousness not only produces thoughts, but prana itself is subservient to consciousness, which is why the saints can sometimes infuse a dead body with prana and they get a second innings, you might say. And then the third thing, which is the farthest, but still an expression of consciousness, is matter. So you and I are seeing matter reality today. The chaos, the news, the difficulty, the confusion, the extreme helplessness. But remember, friends, this is farthest from truth. On its own level, unfortunately, it is true. But if anything, it is a call to raise our consciousness. So even if one soul, and think of an army, a global army of souls which raise their consciousness. When we raise our consciousness above all, yes, we should help people outwardly. Yes, we should, pray for them, send them healing energy. Yes, we should give them positive thoughts and quotes. But they who stay in God consciousness and can touch it, even if it's for a moment or a minute in your meditation, it's like a shaft of God's presence in the form of peace, calmness, joy, wisdom. Wisdom is what people need. What's really going on? When you don't know that, often there's a blame game at a very high level also. But when you simply understand what's going on, you get the full picture. It's like Padre Pio. He said, this is a beautiful illustration. He said, a mother was making crochet and she was stitching this whole thing. You put it on a rim and you're stitching this needle up and through, back and forth. And her little child is sitting on a little stool and he's wondering why his mom is not playing with him, talking to him. She's so engrossed in her work. And after a while, he said, Mama, what are you doing? She said, my son, I'm making some beautiful, crochet work over here, a beautiful embroidery over here. And he said, okay. Then he said, I don't think it's very beautiful. Actually, as a matter of truth, it's quite ugly. Because he's seeing it from below and he's seeing these dangling threads and a totally unintelligent design. And then he says, Mother, I don't see any beauty in this. And then she says, okay, give me a moment. And she lowers her artwork. And the boy says, my goodness, this is spectacular. That just two sides of the same equation. And yes, we may be in a little unfortunate situation because our understanding is not developed. Our true sight has not yet been open, and often, unfortunately, takes suffering, personally or in the family or in the world, to wake us up. And there are only few people, unfortunately, who finally wake up to not go back to sleep. And they say, like Buddha, I will wake up and I'll bring the truth to all my brothers and sisters. Like Yogananda, once he was fighting with Divine Mother, why so much suffering and death? This was World War I or II, I think. And Divine Mother said, but it's a dream. He said, Mother, I know that. And the others are howling in pain. They don't know it's a dream. She said, you should tell them. That's why I have created you. He said, I tell them, but they don't understand. They forget. And he said, what can we do about this? He was really on our side. And Divine Mother, after a little back and forth, she said, Mukunda, which was Yogananda's childhood name, this is how it is. That God, now ultimately, God has the right to say that. It may seem a bit heartless on Divine Mother's part to say this is how it is. But friends, in the final analysis, I'm not doing a shifting of blame game over here, but truly, in the final analysis, the masters say, God alone exists. His consciousness has become you and me and given itself an individualized ego. So I feel the pain, and I don't think God is suffering, but it's not right to say that. Ultimately, who is suffering in me, through me? It is God in his limited understanding. And the only way out is to expand our understanding. Even a little practice, O Arjuna, of this inward religion will free you from dire fears and colossal suffering and endless duality and the cycles of life and death. What is this inward religion? Meditation, pranayam. Calm yourself, like they say. First, calm yourself. When you calm your heart, calm your breath, then we see that meditation is possible. And in meditation, in Hongsa, in Kriya, in deep prayer also, you simply, go out of breath. Because all you want is God. Your entire energy is focused in that direction. Your devotion is focused. And let not our devotion or our heart be troubled by outward news. Be aware, but don't be so engrossed that you lose the calmness, you lose the understanding, the intuition. And to repeat myself, if there are still some attachments holding us, Swami says, avoid them like the plague. Make a little list. And in this 3-4 week course that I'll start next week, we will go through them. What am I attached to? My opinions, people, places, things. What is it? What is it? Clothes, jewelry? I don't know. We'll make a good list of whatever is holding people back. The moment you cut those cords, we may be surprised. God was always waiting. Your soul was waiting to be lifted up, except so much weight was holding it back. How could it rise in freedom? So let nothing on earth hold me, as we were singing that chant. Rise, O my soul, in freedom. From that perspective, everything else is seen well. We can pray for others well. And even before we find God, our consciousness is elevated. Let's pray. Let's serve. Let's think of what is the problem that people are facing. How can I be a solution? And yes, it's good to help at whatever level because you're helping people wherever they are. However, help them understand and send out these rays through your brain all the time in the coming months that there is a picture which we are not seeing, and perhaps the world is waking up to a beautiful reality, which ultimately is what alone will bring us happiness and peace. God bless you. I want to show you just a few books which we will be going through in our classes because it's important. It's not like they say, it's easy to say, harder to practice, and also quite hard to understand these teachings. So Yogananda ji's own words are written on death. There are entire chapters. What is death? Is it a delusion? What is suffering? Why does it come? Karma and reincarnation, and how to attain liberation. And thank you, Pradnya. I'm seeing she's posting the links over here. Then there is Religion in the New Age, which talks about how to face the final exam of death. Kriyananda ji has written a beautiful article. And finally, this new book, which we have in India now, Transitioning in Grace, that how can we learn from the example of others like you and me who've gone before us, And recently, some of them, there are 20 stories of how did devotees and yogis approach their passing, their transition, which they knew was coming, and how do we develop this understanding? Which I think is like we have a lot of things outwardly now, medically speaking, financially speaking, but let's develop this wisdom. Let's try to find ways to share this wisdom with others. Thank you for joining, friends. I'll do just a very